The credit alert notification appeared on my phone at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday night. New account opened. Business Express credit line, $75,000. I sat up in bed, staring at the screen in the darkness of my bedroom. I definitely hadn't opened any business credit accounts. I immediately logged into my credit monitoring service and scrolled through the recent activity. My heart sank as I found 3 new accounts opened in the past week. A $75,000 business line of credit, a $50,000 equipment financing loan, and a $125,000 commercial real estate loan. All applications had been submitted using my personal information, employment history, and social security number. The total exposure was $250,000 in fraudulent debt that could destroy my financial life. But I knew exactly who had access to my financial information. My brother Jake had been staying in my spare bedroom for 2 months, supposedly getting back on his feet after his latest business venture collapsed spectacularly. During that time, he'd had unlimited access to my home office, my daily mail delivery, and all my personal documents. I got up and padded quietly to my home office, careful not to wake Jake. My filing cabinet was slightly ajar. I always kept it locked, but the lock had been picked. Someone had been rifling through my tax returns, bank statements, employment records, and insurance documents. On my desk, there were faint impressions on my notepad where someone had pressed down hard while writing, probably practicing my signature. I opened my laptop and checked the browser history. Someone had been researching business loan applications, how to establish corporate credit using personal guarantees, strategies for maximizing loan approvals, and even articles about identity theft penalties. The searches had been conducted during business hours when I was at my job downtown. As a forensic data analyst for a major insurance company, I had extensive experience with fraud investigation, digital evidence preservation, and financial crime patterns. My home network was configured to log all internet activity, and I had security cameras positioned throughout my apartment that I'd installed after a break-in 2 years earlier. I pulled up the network activity logs for the past month. Jake's devices, his laptop, tablet, and smartphone, had been accessing loan application websites, business formation services, credit monitoring sites, and financial planning forums. He'd also downloaded copies of my personal documents and uploaded them to several cloud storage accounts that I could trace through the network traffic. The security camera footage was even more damning. Clear video showed Jake sitting at my desk last Tuesday, methodically photographing my tax returns and employment verification letters with his phone. In another clip from Thursday, he was practicing my signature while holding my driver's license for reference, testing different pens and writing styles. But the most incriminating evidence was audio from my smart home system. Jake had made several phone calls from my living room, not realizing that my voice assistant automatically logged and stored conversations containing financial keywords like loan, credit, fraud, and identity theft. In one recorded call from last week, Jake told someone, "Your credit is perfect and you're too stupid to use it. I'll make millions with these loans and pay everything back before you even notice." She's one of those boring, conservative types who never takes financial risks. In another conversation, he bragged, "My sister is this uptight data analyst who never does anything interesting with money. She has perfect credit and no debt, so I can probably get approved for anything using her information. She's too trusting and disorganized to suspect anything until it's too late." The next morning, I watched Jake get ready for what he called important business meetings. He was wearing his best suit, one I'd bought him for job interviews, and carrying a new leather briefcase filled with documents I recognized as copies of my financial records. "Big day today?" I asked casually while making coffee, keeping my voice neutral and interested. "Huge day," Jake replied confidently, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "I'm finalizing some major business deals that are going to change everything. Within 6 months, I'll be running a multi-million-dollar operation." "That sounds exciting. What kind of business are you starting?" "Import-export company specializing in high-end electronics from overseas. Consumer devices, computer components, that sort of thing. The profit margins are incredible if you have enough capital to get started properly." "How are you financing the startup costs?" "That sounds like it would require significant investment." Jake's expression became evasive and he avoided direct eye contact. "I've got some investors lined up. Silent partners who recognize my business acumen and want to work with someone who knows how to make serious money. That's wonderful, I said. I hope everything works out for you. Oh, it will, Jake said with complete confidence. This time next year, you'll be asking me for financial advice instead of the other way around. After Jake left for his meetings, I called the 3 banks that had approved the fraudulent loans. I spoke with loan officers at each institution and confirmed that applications had been submitted using my personal information, but requesting that all correspondence be sent to a business address I'd never heard of, a small office complex across town. The loan officers were shocked when I explained that I hadn't applied for any business loans and that someone was using my identity fraudulently. Ms. Peterson, these applications were approved based on your excellent credit history, stable employment, and comprehensive financial documentation, said Sandra Mills from Business Express Credit. The applicant provided tax returns, bank statements, employment verification, and even credit reports. Everything appeared legitimate. Those documents were stolen from my home, I explained. I need to file fraud reports immediately and freeze all accounts. We'll freeze the accounts pending investigation, Sandra assured me. This appears to be sophisticated identity theft. You should contact law enforcement immediately. This level of fraud typically involves federal charges. I spent the morning filing fraud reports with all 3 banks, reporting the identity theft to the Federal Trade Commission, and documenting everything for my insurance company. Then I called Detective Ray Thompson from the Financial Crimes Division, whom I'd worked with on several insurance fraud cases over the years. Detective Thompson? This is Angela Peterson from Consolidated Insurance. I need to report identity theft and business loan fraud. I have extensive evidence including video footage, audio recordings, and digital forensics. How extensive are we talking? He asked, his interest clearly piqued. Complete documentation of a systematic fraud scheme including network logs, security camera footage, audio recordings of the perpetrator admitting to the crimes, and a timeline showing premeditation over several weeks. That's more evidence than we usually see in identity theft cases. Can you come in this afternoon? Bring everything you have. At 2 p.m., I sat in Detective Thompson's office with 2 thick folders of printed evidence and a laptop containing digital files. The documentation was overwhelming: screenshots of fraudulent loan applications, network activity logs showing Jake's research into business loan fraud, security camera footage of him stealing my documents, audio recordings of him bragging about his scheme, and a detailed timeline showing his systematic approach to identity theft. Angela, this is some of the most comprehensive fraud evidence I've seen in 15 years of financial crimes investigation, Detective Thompson said, reviewing the materials spread across his desk. You documented everything. I'm a forensic data analyst by profession. I know how to preserve digital evidence, maintain chain of custody, and build cases that will hold up in court. Detective Thompson examined the bank statements showing the fraudulent accounts and loan disbursements. Your brother obtained $250,000 in business loans using your identity. The applications show sophisticated planning, premeditation, and knowledge of banking procedures. He's been living in my apartment for 2 months, systematically collecting my personal information. The camera footage shows him photographing my documents over several weeks, not just a single opportunistic theft. The audio recordings are particularly damaging, Detective Thompson noted, playing back Jake's recorded conversations. He explicitly admits to identity theft and fraud. He also demonstrates clear knowledge that his actions were criminal and that he was deceiving you. What kind of charges are we looking at? I asked. Identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, and potentially money laundering if he's moving funds between accounts to hide the source. With this amount of money involved and evidence of premeditation, we're definitely talking about federal charges. He could be looking at 8 to 10 years in prison. Detective Thompson leaned back in his chair. There's something else you should know. We've been tracking a pattern of family-based identity theft cases recently. Perpetrators often target relatives because they have easy access to personal information and they assume family loyalty will prevent prosecution. Jake definitely assumed I wouldn't catch him or wouldn't pursue charges if I did, I said. The sophistication of his scheme suggests this isn't his first time committing fraud. We'll run his background and see if there are other victims we don't know about. That evening, Jake returned home in an excellent mood, carrying shopping bags from expensive stores and practically bouncing with excitement. "Angela, you'll never guess what happened today." He set down bags from Nordstrom Apple Store and a high-end luggage retailer. "All my business financing came through. I now have access to over $250,000 in working capital." "That's wonderful," I said, maintaining my supportive sister act. "Your investors must really believe in your business plan." "They do. In fact, I've already started making some strategic purchases for the company." He showed me a new Rolex Submariner watch, an expensive Italian leather briefcase, and a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro. Image is everything in international business. You have to look successful to attract the right clients and partners. "That makes sense. When do you expect to start seeing returns on your investment?" "Within 90 days, I should be generating enough revenue to pay back the initial loans and start expanding operations. This time next year I'll probably be worth millions. Maybe I'll even hire you to do my corporate accounting." Jake spent the next hour showing me business cards he'd had printed with gold embossing, a company website he'd hired a developer to create, and incorporation documents for his new business, Peterson International Trading LLC. He'd used the fraudulent loan money to create an elaborate facade of legitimate business operations. "I've rented an executive office suite in the financial district, hired a receptionist and a secretary, and even put a down payment on a warehouse facility for inventory storage," he said proudly. "This is going to be the business venture that finally makes me rich and proves everyone wrong about my abilities." What Jake didn't realize was that none of the loans he'd obtained were actually his responsibility. Since he'd used my identity and credit history, I was legally liable for all $250,000 in debt if the fraud wasn't discovered and prosecuted. His business empire was built on my financial reputation, and his failure would destroy my credit rating. The next morning, Detective Thompson called with an update from his investigation. "We've traced the business address your brother listed on the loan applications. It's a small executive office he rented using cash payments and fake business references. We also found the warehouse facility and confirmed he's been spending the loan money on business setup costs and personal luxury purchases." "What's the next step in the investigation?" "We're preparing search warrants for the office, warehouse, and your apartment. We want to seize all evidence of the fraud and any assets purchased with the stolen loan money. The prosecutor wants an airtight case before we file federal charges." "When will you execute the warrants?" "Tomorrow morning around 9 a.m. We'll need you to be present when we search your apartment since it's your primary residence. Can you arrange to be available?" "Absolutely. I'll make sure I'm home. One more thing. Don't let on to your brother that you know about the fraud. We want to catch him with all the evidence in place before he has a chance to destroy anything or flee." The next morning, I woke up early and waited for Jake to leave for his fake office. He left at 8:30 a.m. as usual, carrying his expensive briefcase and talking loudly on his phone about important business calls he needed to make in meetings with potential overseas suppliers. At 9:15 a.m., Detective Thompson arrived with 3 other officers, a federal agent and several evidence technicians carrying boxes and camera equipment. They presented me with search warrants for my apartment and Jake's rented office space. "We'll be as careful as possible with your belongings," Detective Thompson assured me as his team began systematically documenting and seizing evidence from my home office and Jake's temporary bedroom. "We found additional fraudulent documents," one of the evidence technicians told Detective Thompson, holding up fake business licenses, forged bank statements, and counterfeit corporate seals. "Your brother created an entire fictional business empire using your sister's credit and identity." They seized Jake's laptop, tablet, smartphone, several boxes of financial documents, printed loan applications, and copies of my personal information that he'd been storing in his room. They also photographed the notepad with signature practice marks, collected fingerprint evidence from my filing cabinet, and documented the sophisticated setup he'd created for identity theft. At 11:30 a.m. my phone rang. It was Jake calling from his rented office space. "Angela, there are FBI agents and police officers here with search warrants." His voice was panicked and confused. "They're taking all my business equipment, computers, and documents. They're saying something about identity theft and federal fraud charges. What's going on? Did someone steal your identity?" "I have no idea what's happening," I said calmly, following Detective Thompson's instructions to not reveal my involvement. You should cooperate with them completely and answer all their questions honestly. They're asking about loan applications and bank fraud. They want to know where I got the money to start my business. This is insane. I haven't done anything wrong. I have legitimate investors and proper business licenses. Just tell them the truth about your business, Jake. If everything is legal and legitimate, you have nothing to worry about. They're putting everything in evidence boxes and taking my computers. How am I supposed to run my business without my equipment? 2 hours later, Detective Thompson called me back with an update on Jake's arrest. We've arrested your brother on federal charges of identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. He initially denied everything and claimed his business was legitimate, but when we showed him the video evidence of him stealing your documents and the audio recordings of him admitting to fraud, he broke down and confessed to the entire scheme. How did he react to being caught with all that evidence? First, anger. He was furious that you had security cameras and audio recording in your apartment. Then desperation. He kept insisting that he planned to pay back all the loans from his business profits, so it wasn't really theft. He doesn't seem to understand that using someone's identity without permission is a serious federal crime regardless of intent to repay. What happens next in the legal process? He'll be arraigned tomorrow morning on federal charges. With the comprehensive evidence you provided, the prosecutor is confident we can get convictions on all counts. Your brother is looking at 8 to 10 years in federal prison, plus restitution and fines. That afternoon, I started receiving phone calls from family members who'd heard about Jake's arrest through our local family network. The reactions were predictably divided along familiar lines. My mother called in tears. "Angela, how could you have your own brother arrested? He was just trying to start a business and make something of himself. Family should stick together during difficult times." "Mom, Jake stole my identity and fraudulently obtained $250,000 in loans that I would have been legally responsible for. If he hadn't been caught, I could have lost my house, my savings, and my credit rating. But he's your brother. You should have talked to him privately before involving the police and destroying his life." I didn't know he was committing crimes against me until I received credit alerts about fraudulent accounts. By then, he'd already obtained $250,000 through systematic identity theft. My father had a different perspective when he called later. "I can't believe Jake was stupid enough to try this kind of scheme against you. Didn't he realize you work in fraud investigation for a living?" "Apparently he thought I was too trusting and disorganized to catch him," I explained. "He seriously underestimated both my professional expertise and my personal security measures. He always was too clever for his own good. I just never thought he'd be dumb enough to commit federal crimes against his own sister." My Uncle Robert was furious with me when he called that evening. "Angela, you could have just co-signed business loans for Jake if you wanted to help him succeed. There was no reason to send him to federal prison over money." "Uncle Robert, I didn't co-sign anything and I wasn't asked to co-sign anything. Jake forged my signature and stole my identity to commit bank fraud. This wasn't about me refusing to help him. This was about him committing serious federal crimes. You're being vindictive and destroying family relationships. Family should help each other achieve their dreams, not destroy each other over business disagreements. This wasn't a business disagreement or a family dispute. Jake systematically stole my personal information, forged my signature, and obtained $250,000 in fraudulent loans. If his scheme had succeeded, I could have faced financial ruin." The preliminary hearing was held 2 weeks later in federal court. I testified about the evidence I'd collected and explained how Jake had used his access to my home to systematically gather my personal information over several months. Jake's court-appointed defense attorney tried to portray the fraud as a misunderstanding between siblings, claiming Jake believed he had implicit permission to use my credit for business purposes since we were family. But the recorded phone calls where he explicitly stated that I was too stupid to use my perfect credit and that he would commit fraud before I even noticed completely undermined that defense strategy. The federal prosecutor played the audio recording where Jake said, "My sister is this uptight data analyst who never does anything interesting with money. She has perfect credit and no debt, so I can probably get approved for anything using her information. She's too trusting and disorganized to suspect anything until it's too late." The federal judge was clearly not impressed with Jake's justifications. "Mr. Peterson, regardless of your family relationship with your sister, Using someone's identity to obtain $250,000 in loans without their knowledge or consent constitutes serious federal crimes that strike at the heart of our financial system. Jake was bound over for trial on charges of identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Bail was set at $100,000, which he couldn't afford since all his assets had been purchased with fraudulent loan money and had been seized as evidence. While Jake sat in federal detention awaiting trial, I received a visit from his business attorney, Martin Walsh, who was trying to salvage something from the wreckage of Jake's fake empire. Ms. Peterson, I represent your brother in his business affairs. I wanted to discuss the impact of these criminal charges on his company operations and see if we can work out some kind of arrangement. What kind of business operations? His entire company was funded with fraudulent loans obtained through identity theft. Well, regardless of the funding source, he did establish legitimate business contracts, lease agreements, and employment relationships. Several people are now unemployed because of his arrest, and suppliers are demanding payment for services already rendered. Mr. Walsh, Jake's entire business was built on stolen money obtained through identity theft. Any contracts he signed were based on fraudulent financing that he had no legal right to access. Jake asked me to speak with you about possibly testifying as a character witness at his trial. As his sister and the victim of his crimes, your support could significantly impact his sentencing and help the judge understand that this was a family matter that got out of hand. My support? Jake stole my identity and committed $250,000 worth of fraud using my personal information. He could have completely destroyed my financial life to fund his fake business empire. Martin Walsh looked frustrated and desperate. Ms. Peterson, your brother is facing 8 to 10 years in federal prison. His children will grow up without their father. Is that really proportional punishment for what you consider a family financial dispute? This wasn't a family financial dispute or a business disagreement. Jake committed premeditated federal crimes involving $250,000. He systematically stole my personal information over several months and created an elaborate fraud scheme designed to deceive multiple financial institutions. 4 months later, facing overwhelming video, audio, and digital evidence that would guarantee conviction at trial, Jake accepted a plea bargain offered by federal prosecutors. He pled guilty to identity theft and bank fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence of 6 years in federal prison. At the sentencing hearing, Jake was allowed to make a statement to the court before receiving his sentence. Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I was desperate to make my business dreams come true, and I made terrible decisions that hurt my sister and violated her trust in the worst possible way. He turned to look at me sitting in the gallery with my parents. Angela, I'm sorry for what I did to you. I convinced myself that I could make enough money to pay back the loans before you found out, but I realize now how incredibly selfish and criminal that thinking was. The federal judge sentenced Jake to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. He was also ordered to pay $285,000 in restitution covering the fraudulent loans plus penalties, interest, and investigation costs. After the sentencing, Detective Thompson met with me in the courthouse hallway. How do you feel about the outcome of the case? He asked. Relieved that it's finally over, I said honestly. Jake needed to face serious consequences for his actions, but I'm glad he finally accepted responsibility instead of putting everyone through a lengthy trial. Your evidence collection made this case completely airtight. Without your comprehensive documentation, it would have been much harder to prove the systematic nature of the fraud and the premeditation involved. Jake assumed I was too trusting or too naive to catch him. He seriously underestimated both my professional expertise in fraud investigation and my personal security measures. A year and a half later, I received a letter from Jake written from federal prison. Dear Angela, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did and why I did it. I was jealous of your financial stability and professional success, and frustrated with my own repeated business failures. Instead of asking for legitimate help or finding legal solutions to my problems, I chose to betray your trust and commit serious federal crimes. I know now that my actions could have completely destroyed your financial life. Those loans were in your name with your credit backing them, and if I hadn't been caught, you would have been legally responsible for $250,000 in debt you didn't create. I was willing to risk your entire future to fund my business fantasies. I don't expect you to forgive me, But I want you to know that I understand why you had to report me to the police. You were protecting yourself from the consequences of my crimes, just like anyone should do when they're the victim of identity theft. The other inmates here think I'm crazy for not being angry at you for turning in family. But you didn't turn me in. You documented evidence of federal crimes I committed against you. There's a big difference between reporting crimes and betraying family. I hope someday we can rebuild our relationship, but I understand if you can never trust me again. I proved that I was willing to destroy your life to chase my own dreams, and that's not something a person gets over easily. Your brother Jake. I never responded to that letter. Jake served 5 years of his 6-year sentence and was released on good behavior for participating in prison education programs. He now works at a construction company in another state and is required to check in with a federal probation officer every month. Our parents still believe I should have handled it within the family, instead of involving law enforcement. They think Jake's punishment was too harsh for what they call a family business dispute that got out of hand. But identity theft isn't a family business dispute. Bank fraud isn't a family disagreement that got out of hand. When someone systematically steals your personal information, forges your signature, and obtains $250,000 in fraudulent loans using your identity, that's a serious federal crime regardless of whether you share DNA with the perpetrator. Jake gambled that family loyalty would protect him from the consequences of his crimes. He assumed I would be too shocked, too guilty, or too concerned about family harmony to pursue federal charges against my own brother. He was completely wrong. Family relationships don't create immunity from federal law. Trust, once broken by systematic fraud and betrayal, cannot be repaired by simply promising to pay money back or claiming good intentions. And someone who is willing to destroy your financial life to fund their business dreams has demonstrated that they value their ambitions far more than your welfare. I maintained comprehensive digital security because fraud investigation is my profession, but also because I learned early in my career that financial predators often target the people closest to them, counting on family relationships and emotional manipulation to shield them from prosecution. Jake spent months planning his elaborate fraud scheme, confident that I would never discover it or never have enough evidence to stop him if I did. The security cameras, network logs, audio recordings, and detailed financial documentation proved him completely wrong. Sometimes protecting yourself means being willing to prosecute the people who are supposed to love you. Sometimes family loyalty means being loyal to legal boundaries and ethical behavior instead of criminal schemes and fraudulent activities. And sometimes the people who tell you to handle it within the family are the same people who would never risk their own credit rating, financial security, or professional reputation to enable someone else's federal crimes. The sound of the warrant being signed that morning wasn't just the sound of justice being served. It was the sound of consequences finally catching up with someone who believed family relationships would protect him from the federal laws he'd systematically broken. They didn't.